Coming into land at Richmond near Sydney as calmly as on a routine flight, Squadron Leader Beavis completed the 11,500-mile non-stop flight from Scampton, Lincolnshire. The R.A.F. Vulcan had flown halfway round the world in 20 hours, 3 minutes, refueling 3 times in the air.
XH558 is de enige vliegende Falkland ter wereld. Haar unieke vorm is even gracieus als bedreigend. En het is misschien ongelooflijk, maar deze klomp aluminium is stealth, nauwelijks zichtbaar op radar. In de fraai gevormde vleugel zitten 4 Olympus-motoren. Dezelfde die ook de Concorde voorstuurde. De vlieger is Martin Withers.
Well, this is the first time the aircraft itself has come abroad since 1983. So that's quite something, isn't it? Yeah. And it's the first time I've flown an aircraft, well, certainly flown a Vulcan abroad since 1982. This aircraft was actually built nearly 50 years ago, back in 1959, and it's formed part of Britain's major nuclear deterrent force as one of the V bombers. They all had their names beginning with V, meaning there was the Vulcan, there was also an aircraft called the Victor, which carried on in service as a bomber, then a tanker, and then another one called the Valiant, which went out of service a long time ago, before I even joined the R.A.F.
The Vickers Valiant, Britain's new 4-jet bomber, enters squadron service with the R.A.F., the most powerful, costly and complex aircraft the Air Force has ever had. Each one is worth several £100,000, so only the cream of air crews are picked to fly them.
Now, it was during the Cold War, that was the whole thing, that Britain's nuclear deterrent originally relied entirely upon the V-force bombers, the 3 bombers. We all carried from the mid-50s onwards against the USSR. We maintained our deterrent force by virtue of these bombers who could drop nuclear bombs on the USSR. Well, over the years, the actual bombs themselves changed. They got more powerful until in the end. I mean, when I was actually serving on the aircraft, we just used to carry 1 bomb, which looked quite harmless, and it was sort of many times more powerful than the bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So quite a devastating weapon, and so the Vulcan in its day, I mean, it was a nasty piece of work that could have caused an awful lot of damage.
Yeah, the engines that we have fitted to the Vulcan are the Rolls-Royce Olympus engines, and they generate around about 17,000 pounds of dry thrust each. And of course, 4 of those, you know, you can really motor along if you wish. And it was sufficient to do what the aeroplane had to do in a time of war. Mm-hmm. It can go at high speed, relative high speed. It's around about 330 to 360 knots. We can go faster, but you really shouldn't. And it can go extremely slowly, down to around about 140 knots. Minimal, the aeroplane starts to wallow a little bit then, so we never get down there. So we can motor around quite comfortably, around about 150, 160 knots.
It is a delta wing, so a big flying triangle as we describe it very simply. And the big advantage of that aircraft is that with its huge wing, it can generate an awful lot of lift at a very low speed, which enabled it to be very manoeuvrable, particularly at very high levels. In the early days, when there were no real surface-to-air missiles, we could outmaneuver almost any fighter aircraft in the world. And so she, and I keep calling it she was really fantastic. I mean, and at high level, no MiG or F-104 Starfighter or Lightning could outmaneuver us up at 50,000 feet or even higher. It's purely this lift design that enables us to fly slowly, to gain lots of lift at a high level. I mean, if you compare the size of the wing of this to a Starfighter, the F-104, that's about the size of the back door of a transit, you know, and so we have a massively large wing. Yeah.
We had 2 pilots, the captain and the co-pilot, and we had 2 navigators at the back and myself. We sit at the table for 3. The only way I could see out of the aeroplane is through a window which is about 6 inches in diameter, and that faces upwards. So I don't see the ground unless the aeroplane's banked over a bit. However, I do have in my desk a periscope, which I can lift up and then look out the periscope. By a system of levers, I can look above the aeroplane, or I can look beneath the aeroplane. So we're all in there together. It's about the size of a large car, really. It's you've got to be really friendly with each other to work in there, you know?
Very luckily, it was never used as in its main role it was designed for, as a nuclear bomber, dropping nuclear bombs on the USSR. But much to my surprise, and in fact, just about everybody's surprise, I think, we did get involved in the conflict in 1982 down in the Falkland Islands with Argentina, and it was decided that the Vulcan could, using an awful lot of refueling from Victor tankers, could get all the way down from Ascension Island, which is already in the South Atlantic, down to the Falkland Islands and back again, and do some damage down there, in fact. And I was selected as one of 3 crews to do this long bombing raid, and ended up doing the first bombing attack on the airfield down at Port Stanley.
The Vulcan took off from Ascension Island at about 1 o'clock in the morning our time. Its target lay nearly 4,000 miles to the south, well beyond its normal range, but well inside it thanks to in-flight refueling from Victor tankers high above the South Atlantic. Flight refueling was a critical factor, for the Vulcan had to have enough fuel to make an alternative landing if necessary. It probably refueled 3 times on the outward leg and twice on the return. Once it reached the disputed total exclusion zones, it dived to low level, using electronic jamming to blot out Argentine radar pickets. As it crossed the Falklands, its bombing radar picked up the outline of the airfield. The runway itself would have showed up clearly on the screen. The Vulcan carried 21,000-pound bombs. Each bomb will have made a crater about 20 feet deep and 30 feet across, and it's likely it also hit the fuel stores and ammunition dumps near the runway. The Vulcan raid probably lasted less than 3 minutes before it turned home.
Luckily, we were successful in putting the runway out of action. The flight lasted for 15 3/4 hours, and we had to refuel 7 times, 6 of which were at night.
And there were 11 Victor tankers with hoses trailing out the back of them, and you would plug into that hose and take on fuel, and then till you had sufficient fuel to go on to the next leg, and then another Victor tanker would come in front of you and you take fuel off him. In the meanwhile, these 11 Victor tankers were transferring fuel between themselves to keep themselves topped up, and then hopefully on the return journey you see the operation in reverse, where we had the tankers coming to meet us and we take fuel again.
It was quite a memorable trip. The Vulcans, eventually, I say May 82 was the date of the Falklands, and all of the Vulcans were expected to be out of service by about July. It was that close. And then after that, it went out of service, but because of a lot of support from keen aircraft enthusiasts, and a lot of donations from people, and a grant from our national lottery back in the UK, we managed to get her airborne in 2007, displayed last year at a number of displays, and then this year we're hoping to do a full season of displays.
It's an icon. It's an icon in many respects. It's an icon of British engineering of the 1950s. It's an icon now because people are seeing this aeroplane who have never ever heard about it before. There are children now seeing this big triangular thing in the sky and say, "What's that, Dad? I've never seen anything quite like that."
What we're trying to demonstrate here is, apart from its grace and beauty, which we think is very apparent, we do try and fly it slowly, and then showing how manoeuvrable it is, how rapidly it will roll left and right, and the display is, we aim to finish with a steep climbing turn, demonstrating how it can turn slowly with lots of power, lots of noise, and keep itself right in front of the spectators.